My name is Colleen and this is my kitchen. I've struggled with my weight my entire life. After trying every diet in the book without any success, I came to the realization that diets don't work. I started my journey at a size 26W weighing just over 300 pounds. In almost a year and a half, I've lost over 120 pounds and I am a size 14. No W. What's my secret? Eating healthy and moving more. Now I'm here to show you how you can cook healthy food without compromising on taste and lose weight just like I have. Because if I can do it, you can too.
Hello and welcome back to my kitchen. I had a lovely holiday in Southern California and I hope that you enjoyed your holidays as well. And now I'm getting back into the swing of things and trying to come up with some dishes for you, and having come from the sunshine of Southern California back to the rain and cold of the Pacific Northwest, I'm ready for some nice warm soup. So I'm going to be sharing with you tonight a recipe for a French onion soup that is really, really spectacular. And this was adapted from a recipe in a book called My Lunch in Paris by Elizabeth Bard. And if you haven't read it, it's a great read about how she met her husband and fell in love with him and eventually moved to Paris. And each chapter ends with a number of recipes. And so this recipe was adapted from a recipe in there. I've tried to lower the fat and the calorie content a little bit without compromising on the taste, and I hope you'll like it as much as I do. So to get started, what we're going to do is go ahead and chop up our onions. I have 3 pounds of sweet onions here, and so that ranges generally 6 to 8 onions depending on the size. You want to go ahead and weigh them in your supermarket, and that means you want to be prepared for a lot of tears when you're cutting that many onions, right? So all I like to do is trim off the ends. This makes it very easy to peel them. Just trim off the ends and peel off the wrapper, cutting it in half lengthwise. And then we're just going to slice that onion up into about 1/4 inch slices. Once I have that sliced, I go ahead and put that in my pan. And you want to use a Dutch oven or some kind of pot that can go from oven to stovetop, because we're going to be starting this dish in the oven and then finishing it up on the stovetop. And the reason for that is that by cooking it in the oven first, it really gets those onions really, really creamy and melting almost. And it's an easier way of cooking it than having it on the stove and constantly having to stir it. So I'm going to go ahead and finish chopping up my onions here, and then I'll show you what we do next. I have all of my onions in my pan here, and so let's go ahead and move on to the rest of this. I have a dry white wine, Pinot Gris. We're going to use a 1/4 cup of this white wine now. And all I'm going to do is toss this in the pan. Then I have some fresh thyme here. And I want to use about 4 to 5 sprigs of the thyme, so very generous helping of the thyme. We could all use a little more thyme, right? Just get 1 bay leaf. Just throw that right on top. And then we're going to take 1 tablespoon of olive oil, drizzle that over. And then to help reduce the fat, I'm using a Smart Balance Light, the spread. So you want to look for a spread that has no trans fats, and look at the sodium content and the calories and the fat content, and also look at the ingredients to make sure it doesn't have any hydrogenated oils. So in this case, the Smart Balance Light fits the bill for me, but you want to do some comparisons. And so I'm using 2 tablespoons of that, and I'm throwing it right on the top there. And then last but not least, I'm I'm using about half a teaspoon of coarse sea salt. Now, if you're going to be using a store-bought broth, because we will be putting a broth in this later, if you're going to be using a store-bought broth, you want to reduce down the amount of salt that you're adding to it. So I would reduce it down by about half, so a quarter teaspoon. In my case, I'm using a homemade chicken stock later on that doesn't have any salt added. So I can go ahead and put a little more salt in at the beginning. Now I've got my oven at 400 degrees, preheated to 400 degrees. I'm going to put this in here for 1 hour, and then we're going to come back and check on it. Our timer just went off, and Roseville just got over. Ducks won. Thank you very much. First win since 1917. You should smell this. It smells so wonderful. We're not done yet. The onions are nice and tender. They're just starting to melt. What I'm going to do is just give this a good stir. Remember, those thyme sprigs are intact, so is the bay leaf in there. That's okay. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to put this lid back on, just slightly cracked. So we want to leave just a little bit of a gap there. And we're going to put it back in the oven for 1 more hour. Our timer just went off. So I'm going to heat up this burner here to medium, and we're going to move the show up to the stove to finish it off. This does take a while to cook because those onions really have to melt down to make a really good onion soup. Oh, that's exactly what happened. So you can see the inside of my pan has got nice brown bits all over it. The onions are almost inseparable. It's just melted into this nice thick chunk here. So what I'm going to do, at this point I can go ahead and turn my oven off, and I'm going to use another 1/4 cup of that same dry white wine. I'm using a Pinot Gris, but a Chardonnay would work really well in this as well. And so if you don't like to cook with wine, you could use a little bit of chicken broth for this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just deglaze this pan using my spoon to scrape up all these nice crusty bits in the bottom of my pan. When you eat onion soup in a restaurant, it's typically made with beef broth. That's the traditional base for an onion soup. I am using a chicken broth. It just makes it a little bit lighter, but you'll see it'll still be quite dark just because of all the bits on the bottom of the pan that we're adding into this as we deglaze it. So I've added 4 cups of a chicken broth here. If you wanted to make this vegetarian, you could absolutely use a vegetable broth for this. However, I recommend that you use a homemade vegetable broth. I've found that the store-bought vegetable broths have a little too much either mushroom or carrot in them, and so it tends to really discolor the dish, especially those that use a lot of carrots. It ends up kind of orangish or yellowish. It's not very pretty, and it tastes kind of funny. So just use a homemade one, which I'm an advocate of anyway. It's very, very easy. I make my own chicken broth even. Just throw it in 4-cup containers in the freezer, and then all you have to do is stick it in the microwave and thaw it out when you need to use it. And that way, too, you don't add any salt to your homemade chicken broth. So you can better control the sodium content of the dishes that you're making, the soups and stews that you're making. Okay, so now we're going to bring this to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, I'm going to reduce it down to a simmer and let it cook for a final 30 minutes before we serve it up. While the soup is finishing up on the stove, I'm going to show you how I finish up the soup and cook that up. So first thing is I have a wheat levain bread that I bought, and you could use baguette, whatever kind of bread you want to use. It's best if it's a little bit stale and it's a nice crusty, thick kind of bread. And what I've done is I've calculated out on my food scale 2 ounces of bread per person. This particular batch is going to feed 4 people. I'm cooking really for 3 tonight, so I'm going to have some leftovers. So I'm using 6 ounces of bread per person. But you want to figure, I'm using 6 ounces of bread total. You want to figure 2 ounces of bread per person. And I have my oven at 400. I'm just going to toast that for about 5 minutes or so, just until the bread is a little bit toasted. To serve this up, first of all, you want to pick through here and find that bay leaf that we put in at the very beginning, and then the sprigs of thyme. Now those are going to be mostly disintegrated. The leaves have fallen off, but you'll still find the stems in there. So you want to go ahead and pull those out before you serve the soup. Once you have those out, you want to take an oven-safe bowl. So it's like a little crock pot bowl. And just ladle some of your soup into it. And then remember those bread cubes that we toasted? They're going to change weight as they toast because they dry out, right? So by losing moisture, they lose weight. Wish it was that easy for all of us. And so it boils down to about 1.5 ounces once they're dried out. And I want to make sure I have my serving sizes appropriate because that's so important when you're trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So about 1.5 ounces of bread cubes I put right on the top of the soup. And then I have 1 ounce of a shredded Gruyere cheese. Now you could also use a Swiss cheese, would go really well. I really like the Gruyere. It just adds a nice tang and kind of a nutty flavor to the soup. Sprinkle that right over the top. And then what I'm going to do is put this right in my oven under the broiler. And we're going to let that cook just for a couple of minutes, just until that cheese is nice and golden and bubbly. This is why it's important to use an oven-safe bowl for this step. If you don't have an oven-safe bowl, then you could potentially just do the whole pot, but it's so much nicer to have your own little bowl of soup of goodness ready to go. And there we go, fresh from the oven. How pretty is that? So I love to serve this just with a salad, basic green salad on the side, just to complete the meal. I'm going to go sit down and enjoy my dinner. I hope that you give this a try and that you enjoy it as much as I do. I'll see you next time in my kitchen.